This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so again, this is the How to Apply webinar for the Homeless and Special Needs Housing Collaborative application. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the material. If you could please stay muted during the duration of the presentation to limit distraction and feedback, that would be much appreciated. During the presentation, please submit all questions in the chat. We will have time at the end for open Q&A. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on the COC website at the end of the session. Just a disclaimer, this session is a general overview of the local homeless and special needs housing application process, but all applicants are responsible for reading the HSNH guidelines and any other related documents for this funding in their entirety. All materials and resources that could be helpful in being able to fully understand this funding can be found on the Fredericksburg Regional Continuum of Care website. So just a little bit about the COC. The COC's mission is to prevent and end homelessness by developing, supporting, and promoting a coordinated system of human services and housing opportunities for the greater Fredericksburg region. And for us, we really see this as a collaborative effort as a community to prevent and end homelessness throughout the region. And so for the continuum of care, we are staffed by the George Washington Regional Commission, but we do not provide any direct services. The George Washington Regional Commission is really in charge of the planning and strategic efforts of our homeless effort in the community, but we rely on our inner circle of providers who provide all of our direct homeless services. However, these providers cannot do all of the work on their own, and we really rely on the whole community to help us with wrapping services around people who are trying to stabilize in housing. So the Fredericksburg Regional Continuum of Care has over 60 member organizations who all work together in preventing and ending homelessness throughout the entire planning district. Now, what does that mean? The COC has created a definition of ending homelessness. The COC will end homelessness when we have a right-sized system that ensures that all people experiencing homelessness have a path to permanent housing. In particular, we're talking about the ability to identify anyone who's experiencing homelessness, shelter them as immediately as possible, rehouse them within 30 days, and prevent any new episodes from occurring. So we've designed a coordinated entry system to help make sure that we can do that. We have providers who do identification, who do shelter, who do housing, and who do prevention. Now, for this grant funding, it all connects to the main goal and our homeless system. For this funding, we are looking at 3 different pots of funds that go into the homeless and special needs house funding application. We have the Virginia Homeless Solutions Program, which is VHSP, Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS and HIV for HOPWA, and Housing Trust Fund for the homeless reduction grants. And we'll go to each of these funding sources, what you're eligible to apply for, and how these fit into our overall mission and goals. Now, current funding statewide is a little over $15 million for VHSP, $1 million for HOPWA, and almost $9 million for Housing Trust Fund. Locally, we have received a little over $1 million in VHSP, about 140,000 in HOPWA, and just slightly under 500,000 Housing Trust Fund. Now, for this application, there are some different funding timelines. For anyone who's awarded funding for VHSP and HOPWA funds, we are looking at a state fiscal year, so it is July to June. Recipients are awarded on a 2-year basis, though in year 2, you will have the opportunity to move funds between categories and reapply for those funds. But we are currently in year 1, meaning that we are accepting applications from brand new applicants. So if you have never been a VHSP, HOPWA, or Virginia Housing Trust Fund applicant before, you are happy to have you apply. And so this funding that you apply for and are awarded will start July of 2022. For Virginia Housing Trust Fund, though you are applying now, those funds will not start until January of 23. Housing Trust Fund money runs on a calendar year, and this is the first year that it's been included in this application process. And we'll get into the details of all of those, but it will be awarded on a bonus as bonus projects depending on the need and performance of a community. In particular, I think it's important to note that minimum grant request for each grantee has to be $25,000. That could be across different funding categories, but overall, the grantee has to receive at least $25,000. The goals of Housing Trust Fund, of the Homeless and Special Needs Housing Funding is really about supporting our homeless response system through a coordinated community-based activities in order to make sure that households experiencing homelessness are able to quickly regain stability, and that we're able to prevent households from becoming homeless altogether. So that homeless response system that we looked at earlier, this funding is really targeting each of those different pieces and making sure that the community has a coordinated effort towards really making a difference and an impact in preventing and ending homelessness. Now, for the Virginia Homeless Solutions Program funding, there are a number of categories that you are able to apply for. You are able to apply for coordinated assessment or entry, street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, targeted prevention, housing location, and COC planning. In each of those pots, you are also eligible to apply for HMIS money as well as administration money. Now, the VHSP does require a 25% match on the total amount of funds allocated within a COC. There's a couple of options for this. You are able to either match it dollar for dollar yourself, or you're able to actually do it as a community. So if there is a need for a waiver, there's an option on the application to be able to talk about that. You also don't have to match it necessarily with dollars from the category that you receive money in. As long as you are able to match it with dollars to any of these categories, then you can count that towards your match, as long as it's not already assigned to another funding. If there's any questions on match or VHSP, I'm happy to go over those again, but just some general information on what that looks like. Now, for HOPWA funds, this is specifically for persons with AIDS and HIV. You are eligible to apply for tenant-based rental assistance, short-term rental mortgage utility assistance, supportive services, permanent housing placement, housing information services, and administrative costs. And for housing trust funds, we are allowing people to apply for rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless. That includes both supportive services and rental assistance. Housing Trust Fund homeless reduction grants also have projects called underserved population innovation projects. Those will not be included in this application. There will still be a separate application expected to be released in the summer that you will be able to apply for those innovation projects. But anyone who would like to apply for Housing Trust Fund dollars for rapid rehousing or PSH would need to do so through this application. So just a little bit about funding. The George Washington Regional Commission is the COC's lead agency and serves as the collaborative applicant for federal, state, and some local funding. All grantees must go through the COC's local funding process to receive funding from any of the sources. And so DHCD, which is who we will be applying as a community to for these funds, does not accept individual agency applications. This COC process that we are outlining today is the only way to be considered for these funds. If there's any questions about what that looks like, we can talk that through, but I just want to be very clear that if you want to access any of these funds, you have to go through the process we're going over now. Basic funding eligibility for anyone who would like to apply. You have to be a member of the Fredericksburg COC. You then have to agree to adhere to our coordinated entry policies and procedures, and this includes being a housing first, participating in our coordinated entry process, or for domestic violence, being able to show that you have a mirroring process, though not using our process. Adhering to an established project standards, which we have for rapid rehousing, prevention, permanent supportive housing, and are working on street outreach and shelter currently. And then you will have to use HMIS, our database system, or for victim providers, a comparable database. And finally, you do have to meet the basic eligibility required by the funding, which is outlined in the HS&H guidelines. Now, some funding documents that can be helpful as you go through this process is the funding policies and procedures. It outlines the process for applying for funding, seeking letters of support, and the COC review, ranking, selection process. We also have some of this detailed in the local NOFA, which we will look at towards the end. But there's a lot of detail about how we allocate funds, what goes into consideration of the applications that we receive, what the expectations of a grantee are. If you have any questions about the COC's funding process, the funding policies and procedures is the best place to go. It is on the funding page of the COC website. In addition, we have set policy priorities, which outline key programmatic considerations in determining how the COC allocates funding. These are done every year by the COC board. Currently, we are working from the 2021 policy priorities, as the 2022 priorities have not been approved yet. These priorities are also available on the COC website. Just quickly, how we actually go through the funding process from start to finish. We have released the notice of funding, application process, and the scoring sheet. They are all posted on the COC website. You also may have received them through a membership email and the COC news blast. The projects will then submit applications by the required deadline. The Funding and Performance Committee will then review the projects and score them. They then decide all projects that came in, whether or not they will accept or reject them, and determine the amount accepted. If a project is accepted, they can choose to either fund it fully or reduce the amount by some number. Projects are ranked in order of priority of funding. This goes into consideration project type, scoring of the application, overall need, and strategic planning process. Projects are then notified of the outcomes and appeals that are opened. If you feel like you have either been wrongfully scored or considered, or were left out for some reason, you can always file an appeal. Once appeals are closed, funding outcomes and applications are submitted to the board for final approval, and projects have written notification of that approval. And finally, once everything's approved by the board, it is posted for public review on our website before final submission to DHCD. For this application, we are using a new grants platform, which we will go over in just a second. Just to be really clear on the timeline, you have until March 4th at noon to submit. At that point, applications will no longer be able to be submitted in the platform, and late applications will not be accepted or considered. So please ensure that you have plenty of time to submit them, and do not wait till the last minute in case of any technology issues. Technical assistance and any questions that you may have, you are able to contact us Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5:30. Any questions on the application or the process should be directed to our funding email at funding@fredericksburgcoc.org. At this point, I'm gonna pause before we get into some of the other material and see if there are any questions. Okay, so first we're gonna look at the notice of funding availability. This has been posted on the COC website and is available through the email and news blast that was sent out. This is valuable piece of information as it outlines the entire process for how the funding will be, how applicants will apply for funding and how funding will be decided. There's information about all the pots that we have already discussed. There's links to the overall guidelines so that you can see those from a higher perspective and make sure any questions about what was required by taking on a project, which there are requirements from the funding itself, and about eligibility can all be answered through the housing guidelines. We went over the applicant requirements and the funding policies and procedures, but these are available for you there. The categories and our current funding in each of the categories is outlined in the NOFA. And then there is a detailed timeline of what the application process will look like. So as I said, the applications are due March 4th by noon. On the 11th, the Funding Performance Committee will meet and score, select, and rank all of the projects. You will then receive an application notification about how your projects were ranked and scored. So you get a pretty quick turnaround. It's a little over a week. And then there is our open appeals process. Appeals are due by March 16th by noon. Information on what is an eligible appeals and what the process is posted on our website, as well as some brief information in this NOFA. The appeals committee will meet shortly after and make a decision on any appeals that were received. The board will approve the entire collaborative application and scoring and ranking sheets at their March meeting on the 24th. You will then receive written notification by the board, and the collaborative application, along with all individual project applications, will be posted to the COC website on the 1st of April before final submission to DHCD on the 4th. Also available to you is the application and scoring sheets. We want to make sure that you have all of that information going in about what is being asked of you and what you are going to be scored on. So let me pull up that scoring sheet. All right. So as you can see, there are tabs for each of the different project types. So if you have a question on what your application question is, how it relates to the scoring, the overall possible score that you can receive, or how it relates to the overall picture of what the COC is putting together for the DHCD application, that is all outlined here. There is no question on here that we are asking just for the sake of asking. Most of them go with a score and either help us to answer a collaborative application question or are relating to a COC priority that has already been set. So you will see COC planning dollars are only eligible to be applied for by the COC lead agency. Coordinated entry is open to anyone who would like to provide a coordinated response to those seeking assistance. Housing location is eligible to be applied for by anyone who would like to have dollars for a community response to landlord engagement, client housing match, and the connection between actually needing housing and getting into housing. Finally, we use very similar scoring criteria for street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, and targeted prevention projects. And so all of those are outlined here. In particular, a couple of new things that have not been on the scoring sheet before that I just want to bring your attention to is we are evaluating you on how you prioritize your participants, whether or not that's the COC prioritization process or one that you've developed yourself, how you leverage mainstream resources, whether or not your services are available to the entire community. And then there are multiple points for housing first where it has not been as emphasized in the past. Finally, there's a lot of information that's needed in order to get points around racial disparities. So we want to see that you are actually evaluating the race of your participants, how you're making sure that your projects are equitable, and how you're able to do those things. So those are just some of them. If there's any questions on the scoring sheet or the application questions so far, I'm happy to take those before we actually walk through the grants system so that you can see what that looks like.
Hey Sam, it's Mindy. Can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
Question regarding the spending plan. What year are you looking at receiving?
So, Mindy, you do not have to worry about the spending plan. The spending plan is no longer required.
Woohoo! Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, our grants platform. I'm hoping you guys can see this okay. We, for the first time, and I'm very excited to offer this, are doing an electronic system. We're hoping that this makes it a little bit easier to actually submit applications, get feedbacks, have people review our projects, and what that looks like. So, very simple to register. You must have a registered account in order to access the applications. There's some basic information such as your name, email, and a password that you will put in. Once you register, there will be some additional project profile information that it's asked for. You have a choice of either submitting that now or waiting, and I can go to show you where that is. But you will get an automatic confirmation email to get into your project once you fill this out. So let me put in a email so you can see what that looks like. Of course it does. So once you hit register, you'll see these additional details come up. Now the questions that are asked here for you to be able to fill out are those project level attachment, or excuse me, agency level attachments that we usually ask for. So the board of director listing, the organization chart, your 990, your profit loss statement, and your organizational certification and assurances. You only have to fill this out as part of your program your agency profile. You should not have to submit them each time that you submit an application, and if you are doing multiple. If you have participated in our organizational review process, some of these are not required. So please look at the submission details that is also posted on the website, which outlines how to use for both of these. But board of director listing, organizational chart are only required for those who participated in the organizational review if they have changed. The 990 and profit loss statement are not required for anyone who participated in the review. The only thing that is actually required is the organizational certification and assurances. So that needs to be updated every year, so that's why we're asking for that one. If you don't want to fill out any of these information, then you're able to complete your profile. These will all be changed to optional so that you can go forward without having to fill them out. Okay, you'll notice once you get in, you cannot start an application without verifying your email. So let me do that quickly so we can see what it looks like. Let me change the screen so you're able to see what the verification email looks like. So in your email, you will receive a confirmation that just says that you have created an account and you're able to confirm that account. All right. That will then take you to the grant site where you can actually start your applications. There is information about dates and other process level things here at the beginning in case you need those. In order to start an application, you will hit Start New Application. We have the Fredericksburg Regional Continuum of Care as the only active grant right now, so it should be the only option. From there, you'll choose the HS&H grants and then the project type. Depending on which project type you select, will then determine what questions you will be asked. So please be sure that you're selecting the right one and putting in information regarding that project specifically and not your overall agency. So let's say I want to apply for emergency shelter. You then select a project name. We're asking that you please use the standard name selection by saying your agency, what project you're applying for, and then the funding type. So for this, it's GWRC Emergency Shelter HSNH FY23. And you can see now we have different tabs at the top where they weren't there before. And that's because those are the required emergency shelter operations questions. From there, you'll provide some general information about your project. About application type. Application type determines whether or not you are a current grantee of HS&H funding. So if you have never received HS&H funding or did not receive it in FY22, then you are a new project. For those who are current recipients of these funds, you are a renewal project. And for renewal projects, you have two options. You can renew for the same amount of funding that you currently have, or a renewal funding with an expansion, meaning the amount of funding that you currently have, as well as a little bit above and beyond that as a request. Under project contact, please put the person that we will be contacting for all application questions and notifications. For household type, We are looking for whether or not you are serving singles, so households without children, or families, households with children. For DV, this is a very strange way of saying it, but we're looking to figure out how many of the project participants would be targeted towards domestic violence survivors. So if you feel like you're going to have some of your households meet that criteria, then you could put that there. Note that all your new funding, renewal funding, and expansion are considered. So if you feel like currently you meet one population, but your expansion money will be a different population, then you can note that here. We do require that you at least discuss it with your board. Not necessarily that they have to take approval or action, but we want to make sure that your board's aware that you're submitting the applications and what you're submitting them for. So we do request that you let us know what date you're going to be able to do that. Acknowledge that you're going to take on all fiscal responsibility. Even though you apply through the COC for funds, DHCD will contract directly with you for the funds, and they will not pass through GWRC. And so we have just the acknowledgement that that is something that we want to make sure that you're aware of. Now we will then be able to put in all the detailed budget information. So emergency shelter, each of the line items that are available in CAMS, which is the project management system that DHCD will use, will be listed here for you. If for any reason there's something here that you would have otherwise put under the other category, there is an option to add a row, and you are able to then specify what your other category would be. Please note, I did notice that if you add a row, it goes right under the bottom. The total category does not sum for you. So it might be a little bit thrown off and look a little wonky, but just be mindful of that. That is something that this platform is working on, but right now it does not do. For HMIS and admin money, you are able to apply. Please note that the cap for HMIS is 5%, and that's 5% across all your projects. So if you do end up putting all of your HMIS dollars in one of the project applications versus spread out among the others, just know if something happens to that project, your HMIS funding may be on the line. So just be a little bit thoughtful about how that goes. I think the best case scenario is just to make sure that you're doing 5% per project amount rather than sticking all of it across the agency in one. For admin money this year, it has increased from 3% to 5%. So if you do want an increase in administration money, make sure that you're able to put that here. Finally, because we have taken out the spending plan, we ask for a budget narrative and your other funding sources so that we can understand what is funding this project. For other funding sources, please make sure that you're talking about the project specifically. So if you're applying for emergency shelter, I want to know how else you fund your emergency shelter, not all your programs across the agency. And then finally, we do ask for a match attachment to tell me how you're going to meet that 25% match request. There is a link to the template if you should need that. Finally, there is a number of narrative questions. All of these are required, and they all usually have about a 3,000 character limit unless otherwise stated. The great thing about this is it will now count your characters for you rather than you trying to count them in a Word document. So once you get to 3,000, it will cut you off. All questions that are required will have to be answered before you're able to submit. And then once you're able to talk about these questions, there's a little bit about your spending. So we would like to know whether or not you were able to fully expend the prior year's spending and whether or not you project the current year's spending. If for any reason you're not, there is a conditional question about why that is. So that will pop up only if you answer that you have not been able to spend your money. Finally, there are project level attachments. We are looking for project policies, procedures, job descriptions. If you have any MOUs that outline how this project connects to others, we want to see those. Any other additional attachments that you think would be helpful. And then the FRCOC data sheet is required. The template can be found here. So once you submit all of that, you are able to actually submit your application. If you have not answered all the questions, it will not allow you to submit. And so just make sure that you're filling out everything so that you can submit on time and have your application received. Once you actually submit the application, you will get an email confirmation letting you know that your application has been submitted, and the Funding and Performance Committee will automatically get all of your information to review your application. One thing I do want to point out while we are on this screen is those agency questions that we skipped in the beginning. So the agency profile, if you go in the corner to your profile, you will see under account fields all of those attachments that you need. Please ensure that you fill these out before submitting the application so we can ensure that your project or agency level attachments are considered in your scoring and selection. So that's it in a nutshell about the application platform. I'm hoping it'll be really helpful in streamlining your applications. I do see that we have a question from Kathy that may we have additional contacts, more than one login for more than one agency contact to the account for more than one employee working on an application. So it is recommended that you have one submitting account. There is not an option for contributors to the same application. So if Kathy had a login, it was working on an application, and then Mindy had a login and was working on an application, they would not merge together. So if there is a way to have a login with maybe a overall agency email and that everyone has access to, that's probably the best route to go. That also ensures that there's not duplication of applications and that your agency level attachments are all connected to the same account. So my recommendation would be to have one account per agency that everyone has access to and can go in and help support in the creation of those applications. I think there's also something in there about more than one contact for the agency, and we can make sure that there is an additional question in there. I can add that in there, that if you need more than one contact to be on the emails or contact list for your agency, that you can add them there. So we can make sure to do that for you. Is there any other questions about the funding, what you're eligible to apply for, or the grants platform? All right. All right, so I think the last thing I will say is we are here to help and answer questions, especially for renewal applications or new applicants. Renewal applicants, we want you to help. We want to help make sure that you're applying for the right things in the right category and not losing out on money. So if you need information about what you're required to submit or the amounts that you're eligible to apply for in the renewal category, please reach out to us. For new applicants, we want to help support, make sure that we have a robust pool to select from. So we want to help new applicants get as far as possible in the application process. So if there is something that you're thinking about, please let us know. Like I said, you can post all questions to the funding@fredericksburgcoc.org email. We are available between 9 a.m. and 5:30 and are very prompt at answering questions as best we can. So please reach out where we can be helpful. Do not wait till the last minute. I know this is a new process using the electronic system, so please make sure you leave yourself plenty of time to get through the entire process with our new grants platform.
Hey, Sam, it's Jill from Micah.
Hey,
Question about how or if this new system feeds into CAMS. How
it
it
does
relates.
not.
So when the process and the appeals process and all that is done, it still remains our responsibility copy and paste into CAMS and submit to DHCD ourselves as agencies?
No. So after this process, your role as submitting any application is completely done. The community COC lead will submit a collaborative application, including all the applications through this process. So unlike HUD, where we have those two systems and you apply on both, for this funding, it's a little bit simpler. You just apply to the COC and then you're done.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. All right, at this time, I'm going to stop the recording.